Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. We are in the heart of spooky season right now. As this episode goes to air, it is just before Halloween. So I figured before we begin, we would talk a bit about what our plans for the holiday are. On or around it, if we have anything, festive to look forward to, or that by the time this airs may have already happened. With me today are Cody and Brett. So let's find out what we're doing to get into the spirit of things. Cody, I know you always have grand plans for this time of year. So how are those going, or how have they gone?
Spooky. Yes, this will drop. The Halloween party will be over. We're doing video games this year and anticipate a good time for everybody. That's going to be happening. This year is kind of interesting because typically when the Halloween party is over, there's kind of like Sunday, everybody is dead after the Saturday thing that's taking place. And then, there's depending on how the calendar falls, because we usually hold the party the Saturday before Halloween, typically. So then there's kind of like the weird X amount of day crawl to the holiday itself, which is when the kids are more excited for trick-or-treating and things of that nature. But this year is gonna be weird because as this episode will be dropping on Monday, the party will have been over. On Sunday, guess who are staying will be slurking their way back to their respective homes while my parents are on their way to my house.
Oh
And they will
man.
arrive Sunday night because Monday morning I will be flying to Mexico. Hopefully still not hungover at that point, but we will see. And we're going down for a wedding on Tuesday. Karen's cousin is getting married. I've never been to Mexico, so this will be a new country for me on my list. And I think it's just at a resort, like we're not going to be sightseeing or anything, but we'll be there for 2 nights, turn around on Wednesday and come back home. And then I believe Thursday is Halloween proper. So I think my parents are going to stay for trick-or-treating here, and then probably take off after that. So what is normally a busy week this year will be an even busier week, but it should be fun. Good times all around. It's kind of funny too because I have presents for my family because we were supposed to see them in August, and as Brett knows, we never made it home to our hometown. So I have their respective Father's Day and birthday presents here from June and July still, which they'll be now receiving at the very end of October. So, but I could have mailed them, I guess, but one of them is kind of obnoxiously large, so I didn't want to do that. So. Yeah, so it should be a really, really, really busy week here. But yeah, how about you, Brett? The
Yeah,
usual razor blades and
yes.
candy and
In the apples, yes.
okay.
No, we don't really have any big plans. We just hope that this year we don't have snow on Halloween, which is what we had last year,
Great
and
point.
therefore we didn't get to go out and do a bunch of trick or treating with the kids. Hopefully we get to go out and enjoy that a bit this year because a couple years ago we went out and everybody had a lot of fun with it. So um,
It's kind of funny how like the Earth is like Halloween's like the line in the sand for global warming. It's like it can be 80 till like October 25th now, but Halloween comes around, they're like, no, we're still gonna fucking snow on your kids. It doesn't matter.
yep.
Uh,
Yeah. So, other than that, no real big plans. What I can talk about that kind of relates to the season is I have restarted playing Diablo 4, which just a little under a year ago I swore off playing for the rest of my life, and back here I am. So, um, yeah, one of the primary reasons that I stopped playing it the first time was that I found that playing solo, it was like really like way more grinding than I wanted it to be. Like I remember Diablo 1 and 2 being like you dive into a dungeon and you just like plow through a bunch of monsters, demons and whatnot. And yeah, it was dangerous, but usually just like you're just slaying like crazy. And then like in Diablo 4, if you're playing solo, it definitely gets to a point where like it gets very hard to progress because like the enemies just get really like spongy, like bullet sponges, except you don't have
Mhm.
bullets. But I've been playing with a couple of my friends who recently picked up the game, and we've been going in as a trio a lot of times, either like two or three, and that's made it way more enjoyable. I've been enjoying my time with it a lot more. Um, I wish it wasn't built around playing as a party quite so
Hmm.
heavily. Uh, but since I've been playing with a group, it has been a lot of fun. It is a well-made game overall, which I believe I talked about the first time I talked about it and quit playing it. But it was just as a solo, it was not a great experience. But in a group, it has been pretty good. So
Nice.
Age of Empires 2, if you're listening, it's not happening. Just don't get any ideas, okay?
Um, Building off of that for just a sec, I will say if you're looking for a good, fun single player alternative to Diablo 4, there's a game called Last Epoch that's really, really hit that note for me. It came out, I think, about a year ago. I should really get back to it at some point, but what I played of it, I really liked. It's got a good
I've heard.
visuals. Oh, go
Oh,
on.
go ahead. I just said I just have heard of that. And I've heard a lot of good things about it. So
Yeah. So, and it is very accessible as a single player game. So, but yeah, if you're having fun with Diablo 4, go nuts. But I just figured I'd toss that out there as an option. Um, let's see. On my end of things, let's see, what can I say that won't involve a time paradox with things that might happen after we record this? Um,
How's your ghost ship doing?
oh, it's a work in progress, always. Um, but yeah, so I mentioned a while back that I'd finished a game that we were going to be reviewing on here. But in keeping with the horror spirit of things, I've delved through other things in my Steam library that I haven't had a chance to really play yet. And I decided to try a indie horror game called My Friendly Neighborhood, which is essentially a horror version of the Muppets, where you're just this hapless maintenance man who's been called in for one last job of the week to disable an antenna that's on top of what's supposed to be an abandoned television station that has
Let me
been.
guess. It's
Yes.
not abandoned.
Oh, well, it's not abandoned, or it's not inhabited by people.
Okay.
Um, but it that the station has suddenly come back on and started broadcasting over other things. So it's a problem. They called you in to fix it. And yeah, you end up running from your life from murderous puppets. But during the whole experience, they're playing it very straight. Like these characters are themselves. They're very bubbly. They're very happy, and they're just trying to like take you apart and arrange your parts by color because that's it's just things like that that should be innocent, but they're really not. It's a good time so far.
What's
I've been enjoying it.
what's that look
Um,
like graphically out of curiosity?
it very bright and colorful for a horror game. I
Is
mean,
it
there are
like, I
certain.
mean, like 8-bit or 16 or like modern looking
Oh no,
or
it's modern. Yeah.
oh,
So
okay.
like
What's
full
it called?
3D, My Friendly Neighborhood. And I mean, as horror games go, it is fairly kid friendly, despite the mentions of wanting to like take people apart and stuff. But yeah, it's goofy, it's creepy at the same time, and it's been fun. Um, and I decided to check that out because I had recently rediscovered Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which was I thought just a like a little web series from about 10, 15 years ago. I discovered like a couple of years ago, it did manage to get a television release with like new content and also involves a lot of puppets and just weird mind bendy stuff. That's a lot darker than My Friendly Neighborhood, but it is definitely my style of horror. Um, which sort of brings us to what we're talking about today. Nothing quite that weird or at least that outlandish, but certainly a bit spooky. Today we are talking about a little phenomenon referred to as the Faces of Belmez, which is something that has been happening in the town of Belmez de la Mor. My wife is going to kill me for this. Belmez de la Moraleda in Spain, which translates to Belmez of the Morality, a small village, by all accounts, population even to this day of, I believe, under 2,000. But it's drawn a lot of acclaim and some, you know, international attention, as evidenced by the fact that we're talking about it, because since 1971, at least until 2004, but possibly until the present day, in the kitchen of a house, there have been faces appearing in the concrete on the floor. Faces that return after they've been removed, faces that move on their own when no one is watching, and that change expression. And to this day, it's it is potentially still a mystery as to what caused them, why they're appearing, who they are. But let's delve into that. But first, before we begin, had either of you two heard of this before I suggested it for a topic?
I can't recall hearing about this one, so this was a new one to me. Pretty intrigued by exactly what this is as well. Like for such a simple idea on surface, it's kind of an interesting case to look into.
This was another one that I had heard on a paranormal centric podcast that I listened to. So I was pretty familiar with the story in overall.
Okay. Interesting, because I hadn't really heard of this until we were looking for content for Spooktober, and I started digging, and this one seemed different and interesting. So that was my first exposure to this was like a couple of weeks ago. All right, so let's go over the facts as we know them. So this happened and might still be happening in the home of a woman named Maria Gomez Pereira, who lived with her husband Juan and their son Miguel. She was in the kitchen one day when she happened to notice a discoloration on the floor that she didn't pay a whole lot of mind to until the more she looked at it, she noticed that it was really in the shape of a discernible face. The face of an old man, I believe, was the first one that appeared. She tried to scrub it out, but it didn't come clean. It resisted any efforts to remove it by normal means. Some accounts say that scrubbing it made it change its expression, but I haven't been able to verify that independently. So to try and get rid of it because she found it creepy, she asked her husband and their son to dig up the floor with a pickaxe, remove that piece of concrete, re-cement it, or reseal it over with fresh concrete, and just let it be, let it go as a weird phenomenon. Which worked for a little bit until some days later, a new face came back, and then others began to join it. Different faces, different expressions. They weren't always in the same place from one day to the next, and this, understandably, drew a lot of attention from a town of 1,800 people. And whether she wanted to or not, Maria became something of a local celebrity, to the point where international press became involved. But we'll get there. So in an effort to try and get to the bottom of this, the family decided, well, let's just dig up the whole floor and try to figure out what might be causing this, like something underneath, because all the observations and tests they had done up until that point they seemed to suggest that there's no rational explanation for this. So they dug and kept digging, and from what I've heard, when they got to about 10 feet below the surface of the floor, they found the body or the remains of several people, the skeletal remains of several people. And depending on what source you're referencing, the headless skeletal remains of several people. Now, if there weren't so many accounts of this, I would have thought this was just kind of like embellishment, but it seems like this is a common factor that's been reported on kind of across the board. And I'm not sure if they did carbon dating or what, but they determined, or at least speculated, that some of these skeletons were as many as 700 years old. Now, that's pretty weird just in and of itself. But the skeletons were removed. They were given a proper burial, somewhere else, and the family thought that would be the end of it. But if you've seen a horror movie, especially specifically Poltergeist, you know that's not the end of it. And sure enough, within a matter of a few weeks, the faces came back and just kept on coming back. Now, this is where we get into sort of some of like the hard testing that begins after this point. But given the story so far, what do you guys think? Does it seem like does this seem like something that was staged or that was like being done for attention, especially considering they did find actual bodies underneath? Or do you think like something else is going on here based on just what we know so far?
First thought I had was, put a rug down.
I would have solved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very fair point. But I mean, the human mind is a curious thing. Like we want answers to things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now talking about something that happened half a world away, starting 50 years ago. But things get stranger, but also a bit more convoluted because at this
let's
point,
pause for just a second still.
oh, sure.
Jump
Yeah.
back in here. Brett, were you gonna say something there?
I was just gonna say that, putting bodies in the ground on the floor and finding 700-year-old bodies, that they really went deep with this hoax. So,
Well, this was a question I was going to ask before we got on the air, which was like every website has this information about these bodies they found, but like, is this actually documented anywhere officially that these are like, that like I don't know what I'm looking for here, like photographic evidence that they like pulling bodies out of this house, or it says they were reinterred into a Catholic cemetery, but like, was there no? So they ripped this hole of concrete, this patch of concrete out of the kitchen, and underneath, first of all, 10 feet's pretty deep to dig, I guess, if you're putting new concrete in the middle of your kitchen. But anyway, they find these skeletons, and that's not like a tip off to be like, oh, the rest of this house is probably also over skeletons. They just took it as face value that they were like, we happened to hit upon this one spot that had the skeletons below, which I guess the face, but
I did see a couple of sources saying that there were remains discovered under other houses in the neighborhood. Like this was built over over an actual ancient cemetery.
We've seen poltergeists. We know how this goes.
But the only house that reported any sort of paranormal goings on was Maria's. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I'm looking and I can't find any photos of the actual skeletons themselves, which is interesting in and of itself because you think some sort of press would have snapped a photo or two.
You would think, but I don't know. Okay. All right.
Okay. So they lay the bodies to rest. Hope all is past, but sure enough, the faces keep coming back. At this point, they decide to bring a more official researchers into this to try and figure out like what's going on. So the first tests were sent to the Instituto de Ceramica y Vidrio, or the Institution of Ceramics and Glass, which they claimed their tests came back showing no evidence of pigment, dyes, or paint, or any signs of human tampering that they could discern, which sounds pretty conclusive, except that they did report traces in the concrete of zinc, barium, copper, chromium, phosphorus, and lead. Several, at least, of those that were at the time, lead especially, used as foundations for pigments in paints and some of them in dyes. Whereas, and I had to dig a bit to really find this information, the general chemical composition of concrete, and there's going to be variants here and there, but for the most part, the composition is primarily silicon, calcium, aluminum, and oxygen, with smaller levels of hydrogen, carbon, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and iron in the mix. But nothing from the above lists should be in your standard batch of concrete, which raises a lot of questions about why they determined there was no sign of human tampering when none of those metals and elements should be part of the baseline concrete.
Well, that's probably concrete not made with human remains, though. So that's
humans are known to be chock full of chromium.
Yeah,
Wolverine especially.
Oh yeah.
So But there was a let's see. But there was a, I believe, German news or like program that decided to take an interest in this later on, and I thought I had their name written down, but I can't seem to find it. Um, but basically, they decided to okay, we're going to film this. We're going to like do a piece on it. We're going to go all the way. We're going to seal off the kitchen for 3 months, cover the floor with cloth and wax to make sure that no one can tamper with it. No one can interfere with the surface or do anything to make images that aren't already there. So the during this time, I gather the family set up like a makeshift kitchen in another part of the house so they could still eat and stuff. But for 3 months, supposedly this area was watched. It was under surveillance. No one went in or out. No one could touch or move anything. And 3 months later, when they removed the covering and opened up the room, there were new faces. Faces that had been there were gone. Faces that some of them had moved from positions they had been in, and seemingly with no explanation. Um, which that on the surface seems like a pretty uh, convincing case for this being something supernatural. Um, with a few caveats. But what do you so had you guys come across the mention of like the whole sequestering the room for 3 months in your research? And if so, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I'd heard that. I think in the one that I listened to, it was like they didn't have the details of like the 3 month thing and like untampered for 3 months. Um, they kind of made it sound more like they put like a cloth sheet over it that they could like see through, and like within days they like noticed things like changing or something. But at least that's
Mhm.
the impression that I got of their depiction of it, which could have been embellished or changed or whatnot. But
Mhm.
yeah, I was aware of it, and it it does seem like if it was a hoax, that's a pretty good case for like it's not a hoax. So
Yeah, the one possible explanation I've seen regarding that is that the faces weren't made with like standard paints or dyes, but something that's photoreactive like silver nitrate, which when it is exposed to sunlight, it darkens over time. Um, Although that wouldn't explain faces moving or disappearing or like changing position or things like that. Um, so that is one possible like workaround to that I've seen, but there are a few things that also throw that into doubt. Because as recently as 2014, after Maria had passed away, essentially a Spanish version of Unsolved Mysteries called Cuarto Milenio, decided to take some of the concrete for testing. So they took a slab of it and brought it into their lab and tried to, or sorry, I got that backwards. They took regular concrete and tried to reproduce what had shown up in Maria's home. So they tried to reproduce the faces with acid, with silver nitrate, with various means. And supposedly, to their surprise, they were unable to replicate what they were seeing inside that house. So there's points and counterpoints to a lot of this that are really interesting to think about. Um, that said, Maria herself died in 2004, and I've seen varying accounts as to whether the faces are still appearing, whether the new ones are hoaxes from her son, because supposedly some of those that were tested showed signs of pigments that he was using to forge them. Uh, Other accounts I've seen say that the faces are still there, but they're beginning to fade now that Maria is gone. Um, but that is, aside from delving into theories about what caused this, those are about all the facts I've been able to find on this. It's a weird and wild case, and every it seems like every reasonable reaction that's being brought to the table has some sort of research or test that's said, no, no, that isn't what's what's causing this. So what do you two make of that? Because it seems like, from what I've seen, assuming that all of these testing institutions and whatnot are, legitimate and they know what they're doing, it aside from, perhaps the strange concrete, discrepancies that I mentioned earlier, it seems like a lot of the rational stuff has been ruled out, which is very unusual for a case like this, in my experience. So yeah, what do you two make of it?
I think you hit it on the head. I was mentioning I didn't have quite as much time to devote to this one as I wanted to, but I was listening to some podcasts and a few websites to kind of get some information on this one. But I think you kind of just summarized one of the main feelings I had after like the initial podcast I listened to was finished, which was this one doesn't on the surface seem as readily false as other cases we've looked at. Like it was harder to immediately be like, well, here's the real explanation for this one. Compared to
Yeah.
many of the things we've looked at on our podcast, and that in itself has me kind of really intrigued by this one, I will say.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that there seems to be like there's a lot of like researchers and scientific people who have looked into this and said, "Oh yeah, there's absolutely traces of things here that show that it was painted or stained or put there by a person in some way." And then there's like other studies, also like more modern studies with up to date like equipment and things that also say that it's wasn't a hoax, that there isn't traces of things there, or like not enough to like show that it was done as a hoax or anything. And so I can't say what is going on there, why there's discrepancy, like why there's two sides of this, but uh it does make it very interesting in that it seems like it's not an open and shut thing. Like there's definitely possibilities it could be either way.
Yeah, so it's despite because of that real uncertainty, I do um I do wonder why this isn't more well known, because it's such an interesting and compelling example of something weird going on. And yet I hadn't heard about it until like a couple weeks ago. Brett, I know you said you knew about it, but I don't feel like this is one of the better known paranormal things out there. And especially Cody, I think you brought this up before we started recording. Especially weird is the fact that when you search for images of these faces online, you can find some, but they're always
Some.
like, yeah, they're always like the same five, six, maybe 10 at most. And you really have to dig to find anything else. And from what I understand, at least while Maria was alive, and maybe even today, you could, or might still be able to tour the house. Like it is something of a tourist attraction. So you'd think over time more people would have gotten more like photographic evidence of this over the years. And the fact that it's always these same images is that's probably the strangest thing about this to me.
Yeah, like
Considering, go on.
I was just gonna just say, like heard reports that there's like they think there's been like hundreds of different faces
Hmm.
appearing in this flooring over the years, the decades,
Mhm.
but there's only pictures of like I say, maybe 10 of them at most. Seems
Yeah,
unusual,
agreed. Yeah. So, but then you have
especially since I don't remember you mentioned it or not, but like you say, it has been like a tourist location,
Mhm.
and apparently like in the early days of when this was first a story, they would get like dozens of people coming to their house every day to take like photos and look at them, and like
Mhm.
and on the weekends apparently it was like thousands of people daily
Wow.
coming to their house. And at one point they actually had I don't think they hired him. I think he just like came and like offered to like take photos or something, like with people. Like the tourists would come in and say, "Oh, photo opportunity," and they would pay him whatever it was. And so like all these people came in. There's photos from all these people, like thousands and thousands of photos apparently out there.
Huh. And yet you
Huh.
can't find any of them online. Yeah, that is so weird.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I guess at this point, what facts there are have been covered. So we may as well try to launch into an examination of the theories that are out there to explain this. First and foremost, of course, being ghosts. And I feel that this time around, ghosts has it has more weight to it than our usual like, oh ha ha ha, that's our throwaway theory. Um, and if it's ghosts, were they connected to like the skeletons or the remains of the people found beneath the house in the town, or is this something else, or what? So what do you think of the ghost theory?
I normally would not give it much credence, even though I love a good ghost, but this one, just with the supposed evidence of bodies being buried under the house. And then also, I think I had heard on that first podcast I listened to too that this was like a city that was hit like extremely hard in like the Spanish Civil War, and like so there was a long history of the town like disproportionately suffering under some pretty bad conditions that other places in the country hadn't even seen. So I I have long believed that like if there are ghosts in the world, like they're probably here for a reason, and trauma is definitely one of those reasons. So I could see that, like just the spirits of the people who manifested themselves from some place that they're at in these images, or maybe like they didn't rip the house down. Who knows how many skeletons are below this house alone? Um, Still the weirdest thing to me. Like
Yeah,
don't dig up the bedroom or the whatever, but. So I can't immediately discount this one, which is again really unusual, I feel like.
Yeah, I know we talked about we did our ghost episode. I kind of fell into a mostly believing in um you know afterlife, spirits in the afterlife kind of thing. But um I I think it definitely feels like a strong possibility. What was weird to me is that many of the faces like seem to be like the way they appear is different. Like so just for example, like one of the first ones that appeared, which they named La Pava, is like very clearly like a human face. Though it's the shape of it is weird in that like its left eye is like significantly lower than its right eye. Like it looks like a Picasso. What it looks like is a Picasso portrait of the Phantom of the Opera. That's what
that's
I
not a
see.
bad description. That's pretty accurate.
So and then you've got like other ones, like most of the rest of them look more like just ink blots, just like you spill something on the floor and it happens to look like a picture of something, you know,
Yeah.
and it very like most of them are not anywhere near this well defined, which
Except
makes
they're
me I don't understand how they could be so different if they were all from the same method.
yeah, there is a lot of difference. Though there is a third type, for lack of a better term, that looks for the life of me like something out of almost like a Renaissance painting in terms
Hmm.
of just the framing of the faces and the way and the expressions on them and stuff. But yeah, they do all look significantly different. Um, and yeah, it's weird. And I guess if they were all spirits of different people trying to make themselves known, they might be able to present themselves in different ways, theoretically. But yeah, it's very strange. I'm sharing kind of a little collage of like 6 of them to the Facebook chat here. But yeah, it's weird. So I honestly think I'm in the camp of ghosts aren't entirely implausible here either, and that for me is a remarkable statement. Um,
Perhaps
just be
some of the spirits are hundreds of years old and they can only draw themselves in the artistry style of their time.
uh,
That is hilarious. Oh my
I love
gosh.
that. Uh, but yeah, so yeah, we'll get to how like what our most plausible rating on this is at the end. I've only got a few other theories here, but yeah, this one is surprisingly not out of the running for me. Which brings us to the next one I've seen thrown about the most, uh, something called thoughtography, which is the theoretical process of psychically imprinting a surface with an image using your mind.
Not to be
Um,
confused with the art of taking photos of that hoe over there.
Oh, you just created a hashtag and I hate it. uh, but yeah, the theory behind this claims that Maria herself was psychically gifted or able, or however you want to phrase that, and that she was subconsciously projecting these images onto the kitchen floor. Um, and I do believe there were even accounts of Maria herself claiming to be psychic, which may have arisen. It's like a cart before the horse thing. Did this happen after the faces started appearing, or did she claim that beforehand? I'm not 100% sure. Um, but so yeah, the thoughts from subconscious thoughts from her head were making these images appear. What do you guys think about that? I mean, it would explain why it was just her house and none of the other ones that were built atop 700-year-old bodies.
Hmm. It, if this, I mean, I don't know. Have they proven that? Is there any kind of proof that this is something that can actually happen? I guess is a question I would like to know. Or is it just completely theoretical? But let's just say it is possible. It would at least explain. It would be another explanation as to how these images could be created and or move after the floor had been sealed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I haven't, I mean, as with most psychic phenomenon, I haven't found any sort of solid evidence that this is a real thing. So,
It's interesting. I never thought about this either, but like, let's just say that it's possible.
mhm.
Okay, and this lady could somehow make images from her mind appear on the floor, or maybe unconsciously she was doing this with like her emotions or something. If she was able to do that, and then we in like our hyper scientific modern world went and analyzed those things, and we were like, oh, it has like these components, like would somebody having the ability to actually like create these things still necessitate like the presence of the elements that we would be normally looking for? Like if she's like, I can project this from my mind, but then like, is she like manipulating elements out of thin air to like create that actual image? Like, is there still a scientific property to that, or is
Mhm.
it like bending the laws of like physics and chemistry to be like, I made this thing with no elements known to mankind? Like, I've never thought about that before either. It's kind of weird.
Mhm.
It'd
Yeah.
be like we could disprove every possible actual instance of this by being like, oh, it has this element. Can't be real.
Yeah, I don't know. And if it does involve like manipulation of physical elements, then that opens up a whole other slew of questions. And it's just, I don't know. Um,
It's a really cool theory, I will say.
it is.
She would have to be really, really be a tormented soul inside to have all these images in her mind that she's projecting.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
I mean,
they're
yeah.
pretty, yeah. Some of the images are pretty dark. I mean, some are
Yeah,
like a
that's
little boy like looking up, but other ones are like Brett said, like here's disfigured Phantom of the Opera, and you're like, ooh,
Mm.
but
Yeah, it does.
yeah.
like if she was doing all these herself, I feel like the fact that so many of them seem like a different art style that doesn't seem to fit so well. Like
Mm.
you would, I guess I would assume at least that if it was all coming from her mind, that they would all be a very similar styling.
That is a valid point. Because yeah, it's like I don't count myself a good artist by any means, but I do know like what my style looks like, and trying to draw in a different style, like it just doesn't seem like it would be very easy even with my hands, let alone trying to project it with my mind.
Mm.
It's yeah, art is a very personal thing in terms of how you present it. So that aside from the overarching, there's no evidence for this being a real thing. Aside from this case, that element also kind of makes it a bit wobbly in my eyes. So for me, I think this is less plausible than ghosts, which is a sentence I I don't think I ever really anticipated myself saying, unless we're talking about like alien Bigfoot or something. Um,
Yeah,
but
it just seems like there's less evidence of this than there is evidence of ghosts. So for
yes,
that reason
Yeah.
alone, it seems like a less plausible option.
agreed. Um, Okay, and on my list at least, that brings us to the last explanation I've got, and that is that it's just a hoax. That they're using some sort of, you know, photoreactive or oxidating agent to make the faces appear over time when no one's in the room or no one's interacting with it. Um, and that it is, bodies aside, it's all just an elaborate bid for either attention or fame or something. So hoax. What do you guys think of that one?
I have problems with this one, believe it or not. Um, not, just to start with, I've seen the mom listed as the person behind the hoax. I've seen her son very frequently listed if these images did continue past her death. And what did she die, like
2004, I believe.
2004? Okay, so there seems to be conflicting reports on whether there's newer ones since then.
Mhm.
If there are, then perhaps her son was behind all of these to begin with. Um, but if this is a hoax, the first thing I think of is kind of what we talked about earlier, which is, whose art style are we creating this hoax in? Like, I don't think anybody is going to be capable of creating all of these art styles. And further than that, my other thought on that is like maybe that first face that showed up on the floor was not a hoax. Like the original one was real. And they were like, oh, we're getting fame off this. So they're like, we're gonna keep making these and go from
Mhm.
there. Um, but also like supposedly, at least with the testing that had been done, nobody really knows how they're doing this either. If it is like a hoax, like there's theories behind it, but like why haven't they been proven unless it's an elaborate cover up? And I've seen like the mayor of the town implicated and other things here as well. But I've also heard like on like the first couple podcasts I listened to on this one, like the family wasn't charging money for people to come see these. Like
Mm.
financial gain, yes, because if somebody wanted to like take a photo or sold the photos or whatever, but it's not like they were
Mhm.
like $10 at the door admission for these. It was
Right.
like more fame, it seems like, than fortune. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a bit of a hard time just a lot of these that we cover there's finds like there's an easy way to say it's a hoax, but I find this one to be a little bit harder to identify as a hoax. Um, in part because of the reasons like we just mentioned, like different art styles essentially, and the fact that they like covered the floor and it still kept happening unless the floor covering was part of the hoax. But it didn't seem to be that, like seeming to be like an official, like done by the local government or city or whatever kind of thing. Uh, and I don't know. It's like one of the studies of like analyzing one of the.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
well, keep an eye on your floor. If you see Brett's face, be worried.
You can
Um,
still hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. I'm glad it's not my connection this time. Let's give him a second here, see if he comes back to us.
Yo.
Oh, his face moved.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
different
It changed
face.
expression.
Said my said my connection was unstable there for a moment. So apparently my internet is a little bit wonky, but
No, it happens.
uh,
I'm glad it's just not me
You were
this time.
talking about something, but I'm not positive where you were at when you cut off.
okay. Well, I was going to mention that like one of the studies when they analyzed these faces, they apparently they could see brush strokes in the in the pigmentation, which I don't know. I haven't seen it, but that's what they claim.
Hmm.
Um, but you would think I don't know. It feels like if there was so much pigmentation like there in that location as to be able to see brush strokes in it, then other studies of that would have said like flashing red lights, like, oh, this is full of pigmentation. You know, it wouldn't be like small traces. If there's enough of it that you can see brush strokes in it, then you think they would be much more conclusive than that. But um all in all, I find it hard to call this just a hoax.
That's yeah. It's weird. I went into this one thinking there was going to be some nice, tidy, rational explanation, which is why, I hadn't heard of it until recently. But no, I mean, there's not a ton out there on this particular case, and I thought that might have been why. But no, it feels like all of or at least the majority of the attempts to, you know, discredit the claims and to analyze them, they've been contradictory at best, and they've validated the fact that these are just popping up out of the ether, altogether. Which I can't say that this is a hoax either, especially because I can't find any notion that Maria or her family were getting any financial benefit from this. Like you said, maybe she liked the attention, but at the same time, that's a lot of people, and it seems like after a while, it would be more of an inconvenience than anything to have that kind of crowd trucking through your house. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Plus, there's questions on this one as far as I just thought about, like, all right, they had this face, they took it out, they had another face. I don't know if they took it out. They took it out a second time, I think, or they took the concrete out or something.
mhm.
But like, why did it explode into like hundreds of faces? Is that like what they felt like they would need to do to continue to capture the public eye? Like 10 faces weren't
Maybe,
famous enough for people. Like they needed hundreds of faces for this to continue to be famous.
Mm,
maybe, but then again,
That's kind of
it
weird
brings up
too.
yeah, and it brings up your thing about the art style too, because that's some of them do look like they were representations from like Renaissance paintings. Others looked like they were, ink blots, like Brett said, or just really rough sketches of the human form. It's just there's so many little elements of this that just don't fit together. And if this was staged, because you would need multiple people, there frequently to, redraw repaint these things. And then how did they move? How did they disappear from one spot and like shift to another?
Yeah, I
It's
actually
just
hadn't heard that bit until tonight. So if that was really happening, I don't know because then that would if that was happening, period, or if they were changing, period, that would also mean that not only were these people hoaxing a way that they were creating something nobody was able to detect, but they could also erase it and then start over someplace new.
yeah, unless whatever agent they were using, evaporated or like somehow dispersed over time. But this is all speculation at this point.
mm,
Um, and I know like silver nitrate apparently isn't all that expensive as like something to use to hoax this out. But I mean, this happened over the span of decades. It had to have, gotten kind of pricey to keep up the habit for that long. So it's yeah, the sheer span of time that this took place during, and all of that, it just makes the hoax part of it seem strangely the most far-fetched explanation to me, and
Um,
that's wild.
I was gonna say, just to put it out there, just as I don't know that I put as much stock into this, but it's just as another explanation listed here, is religious miracle as well,
Hmm.
because this was really what the first, the first fame of the whole thing was this was like a sighting of Jesus or something type moment for the town, and that there was this face that had manifested itself on this lady's floor. And I'm sure, assuming here, but we're in, good town, small area Spain. This is probably a fairly Christian slash area. Although there would be some Muslim influences into that area also. Oh, interesting. Here, this is
Potentially.
a different website that says the house was built over a medieval Muslim cemetery
Oh,
from the 13th century. Interesting.
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah,
I wonder. Oh,
yeah. And that
no.
gets into kind of questionable theological ground too, because I do believe it is forbidden for Muslims to depict human faces in art. That's why you see a lot of geometric patterns and things like that in in the Middle East in terms of like the architecture and whatnot, because that's okay, but depicting people isn't. Um, at least in traditional like you know uh, more strict Muslim practices. So if it's if that's the case, then and if these people that are showing up were of the Muslim faith, that's also it raises a lot of questions too, because then it's like a sticky theological ground. So, um, but
Ooh,
yeah. So did
going going down the rabbit hole on this now. Look out.
yeah, um,
I
but
had
yeah,
heard that the exhumed bodies were buried in like a like a very Christian fashion. So perhaps if they were Muslim of in nature, perhaps they're got very angry after that.
that's entirely possible.
Interesting. Interesting.
I mean, if we're going with this theory, yeah. Um, man. So yeah, were there any other theories that you guys dug up or thought of on your own at all? Or
I don't think so. It's just some interesting little snippets with this one here and there. Like this is a article in the Guardian from 2004 that like the haunted house was put up for sale. Um, and I was just finding something else that said the Belmez Town Council in 2013 opened the Faces Interpretation Center. So that would say to me that they're trying to make some money off of this. But again, that
that
would be like more at the town level.
true?
Mm.
So I guess there is the possibility that Maria and her family got swept up, by in from pressure from the town or the mayor to keep this going to make money for the town, money and press for the town itself. So
Maybe.
Oh,
yeah,
this might be what we were looking for the whole time.
oh yeah,
Let me shoot this over to you guys. I just did a Google Maps search for this place, found it, and they have some photos from inside the building,
Oh,
oh,
which
thank
does
you, Google.
have a couple of the same
Oh,
faces, but there are definitely some different ones here too.
okay.
I would say, wow, it's like a decent sized building too. Oh,
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that one before. Huh.
so
But
this looks like a place, it kind of looks like a standard smaller-ish museum.
yeah,
They have the
interesting.
Catalogo de Caras, which I'm gonna guess is like the Faces catalog or something.
Yeah, that sounds like a decent interpretation.
Antique house of, yeah. Huh, so this is, oh yeah,
Neat.
here's all kinds of
Oh,
stuff going on here.
wow. and again, varying and sundry art styles too. So, or yeah, that's wild.
So,
Huh.
entrance with a gratitude of 10 anyos, the suggested donation,
Hmm.
probably, or something along that nature. So they are making some money off of this,
Okay.
but
Wow.
I don't know if
Interesting.
it's. I mean, the whole thing is interesting to me because I was thinking about earlier, like, how would I compare this to like Bigfoot? Like we did an episode on Bigfoot way back when we
Mhm.
started the podcast, and just thinking about like if you're one of the people who believes the most frequent theory on that, right, was like who was it, Patterson that shot the first footage and like
Mhm.
later on supposedly claimed that he and his friend had like put the suit on, made the video, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Not intending to like maybe make it as famous as it was. I mean, I wonder if this could be like the same type of thing where the family made something just to be a headline, just to, be famous for a minute, and then it kind of like spiraled way out of control when this one with like the town and the church got involved, and then still I don't know though, like would the family continue to make them at that point? This is a really tough one, man.
It is.
Really interesting. I really expected when you told me this one first, I was going to be like, this is kind of like we said, like a really quick, here's the explanation. This was a cool case. Done. But
Yeah. But no,
this doesn't seem to
it's
be the case.
yeah, deceptively complex. Like, oh, so yeah, I guess with that said, and taking into account everything we've looked at and talked about, um, what is your most plausible explanation out of the options we've got? If you want, I
Huh.
can go first on this one, or
Yeah,
okay.
go for it.
Uh, I ah, yeah, heading into this one, I really didn't expect to end up here. Where I mean, there's not a ton of theories that that try to take into account all of this, and of the ones that we've looked at, somehow ghosts is the most plausible for me. And I that's that blows my mind too, just because I am usually kind of even though I have an interest in this sort of thing, I'm usually one of the more skeptical among us, it feels like. But there's just a lot that doesn't add up, a lot that doesn't come together in any sensible fashion, and especially if the accounts of the faces like changing position and changing expression are true. You can't really do that with a paintbrush and some chemicals very effectively. Like, how do you make sure they develop at the same time? How do you make sure that one doesn't run into the other? How do you make sure it's going to turn out right? How do you keep changing styles and positions and perspectives and things? It's just none of it adds up. Um, so I can't believe I'm saying it, but I have to go with ghosts on this one.
Hmm.
The sticking point for me keeps coming back to the fact that they covered the floor and then faces kept appearing.
Mhm.
The activity continued, appearing, disappearing, moving. Uh, Assuming that that itself wasn't part of a hoax, potentially, as we theorized, maybe the city was like, oh hey, we could get some tourist dollars out of this if you guys just keep this going. um you know let's just assume that that's not what happened, and they covered the floor and things still kept happening. I cannot logically label it as a hoax. uh and out of the options left, I also would have to go with spirits imprinting themselves onto this floor. Why? I don't know at all. Why they chose to do it in this woman's kitchen, I don't know. Um, why are they all very different? I don't know. Um, But out of the options that I have to work with, for me, that is the most plausible. Um, and yeah, I don't know where else to go with that. Like, I don't have a better idea. It seems like a weird thing to be happening that spirits would do this here and not like we don't have recorded events of this happening anywhere else. It's like it's the only time in the world this has happened. Um, but I'm gonna have to go with ghosts doing this on this one.
Or like this house isn't haunted, like there's no ghost reports, it's just the faces.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think my feelings on this case are probably, oh, let's see here. Probably best summarized with this quote that I found. There's nothing like the feel of that hammer hitting the strings on a nice thick chord. That quote is from Mike Brogan from the band The Faces of Belmez. You check them out, they're a local band in Cleveland. So check them out. But in terms of the house in Spain, which is probably what you're asking me about, um, this is one of the more compelling cases we've looked at because, like we said earlier, like so often we're just like out of hand. This is the explanation for this, or we can explain this thing away with this thing. This one's really intriguing. If it was a hoax, I feel like everybody had to be in on it. The town, the mayor, the Catholic Church, the family. Um, I don't know. Now, Brett, you'd mentioned the floor thing. I had seen, I think, in that longer presser thing that I sent you guys on Facebook, there was some complaint in there about like when they went to remove the um, protective coating over the floor, like the photos they took that day mysteriously were destroyed or didn't work right, or there was like problems with recording the process of taking that off. But even that aside, like just the fact that there's faces and they move, or how are they doing this? I don't know. I don't know if this is because there are the people buried below. I don't know if Maria herself was somehow a conduit that people from the afterlife are just drawn to her. Um, or maybe it wasn't even her. Maybe it was her son. I mean, maybe her son's not the one doing the hoax. Maybe it was her son that they were drawn to the entire time. I wish we had a clearer answer to the question of whether or not they did continue on after she passed, just because I've seen that both ways here. Like this website I'm on here says some claim the faces still appear today. Well, are they or aren't they? Like, how do we not know
Mm.
this? Um, I would, I think of like a Pleasant Point, New Jersey, right, with the Mothman, and you're like, did they get some tourist dollars off that today? Did it ever happen? Who knows? But they're making money off it today. People still talk about it. People go there, visit the museum, whatever. Is this one of those? But again, my drawback with that, I think, is just the idea of like, well, why so many? Like, and why continue to make them? You don't see a lot of legends that are like actively adding to their legend. Like it was like we saw Bigfoot in this year at this place, or the Mothman happened here. Or this is like, and then another face was added, and then another face was added, and then it moved, and then it was like, this is a lot of work somebody is doing if somebody is doing this. Um, in the spirit of Halloween, I guess, I am going to agree that this is an actual manifestation of people who have passed on and are drawn to Maria. And she was some sort of a conduit for them to, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're like send me help, or like my body is buried under this house. Please help dig up. And they're just like, oh, another face appeared on the floor today. That's weird. But yeah, I'm also gonna say that this is something of supernatural origins. Crazy.
Well,
We finally
yeah,
found one.
yeah. At least one we're all in agreement on, which I mean, sure that happens for like the occasional game or movie, but for something like this is a rarity, folks. So yeah, there you have it. If you want to look into it yourself, there's plenty of articles and things online about the Faces of Belmez. But yeah, this is the one that gives me hope that maybe the world is just a little weirder and a little spookier than it seems. And really, it's kind of all I've ever wanted.
There you
Um,
go.
but with that said, enjoy the last remnants of spooky season here. This has been Justin, Joe, and Brett, and happy Halloween.
America's
Happy
favorite
Halloween.
podcast. Podcast host, Joe. All right.
All right.
Tip. Hey, fondlings and fondlers. This has been another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, your favorite podcast. It's most people's favorite podcasts, or at least so my mom tells me. You can check us out all over the place online at our homepage, www.fondpod.com or fondpodcast.com. You can also check us out across your social media sites, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your streamed podcast. Thanks so much.